Africa and most of the world were colonized by Europeans. This is a historical fact, but if I asked you, how long did it take for the Western world to conquer Africa? Most of us don't have an idea. The colonization of Africa starts from the Berlin Conference, which happened in 1884 to 1885. What follows is now known as the Scramble for Africa. At the end of the conference in 1885, less than 10% of Africa was in Western control, and most were coastline. By 1914, less than 30 years later, 90% of Africa was under foreign rule or colonization for the first time in its history. This period showed the difference in Western powers and the native powers of Africa, and lead to famous quotes like, "To those who say derogatory things about colonialism, I would say colonialism is a wonderful thing. It spread civilization to Africa. Before it they had no written language, no wheel as we know it, no schools, no hospitals, not even normal clothing." This by Ian Smith in 1997, most famous for being the Prime Minister of Rhodesia, current-day Zimbabwe. Another such quote is, "Illiterate cultures do not survive, and they are not very high. The natives of the tribe of the Bugga Bugga Booga Boogas down in lower Bugga Wooga Booga Woog are mostly no longer with us, or they are around waving red flags today and revolting against their central government." This by L. Ron Hubbard, founder of the Church of Scientology. To most they see pure racism, but what this quote shows is a disdain for the civilization that was present in Africa, because it was far behind, compared to the Western world, a sentiment which was true by every metric then. But more damning is this next quote. "Since the dawn of history, the Negro has owned the continent of Africa, rich beyond the dream of poet's fancy, crunching acres of diamonds beneath his bare black feet. Yet he never picked one up from the dust until a white man showed to him its glittering light. His land swarmed with powerful and docile animals, yet he never dreamed a harness, cart, or sled. A hunter by necessity, he never made an axe, spear, or arrowhead worth preserving beyond the moment of its use. He lived as an ox, content to graze for an hour. In a land of stone and timber, he never sawed a foot of lumber, carved a block, or built a house save of broken sticks and mud. With league on league of ocean strand and miles of inland seas, for 4,000 years he watched their surface ripple under the wind, heard the thunder of the surf on his beach, the howl of the storm over his head, gazed on the dim blue horizon, calling him to worlds that lie beyond, and yet he never dreamed a sail. He lived as his fathers lived, stole his food, worked his wife, sold his children, ate his brother, content to drink, sing, dance, and sport as the ape." Thomas F. Dixon, Jr., 1905. To those who know Thomas F. Dixon, Jr., you might attribute this quote to nothing but absolute racism and disdain for the black man. You would be right, but truths have been spoken by the wicked. You're probably thinking that the title was a clickbait, but I don't do that. I've taken you down this part to establish that at the period of colonization, Africa's PR was in negative. That's what happens when your entire civilization rolls and folds in less than 30 years without putting up a fight. So we've established it took less than 30 years to colonize most of Africa. So I have another question. How long did it take from contact with Europeans to the eventual colonization of Africa? When you answer that question, you will begin to see the origin of the title. So to answer the question, I will provide a timeline. 1410, initial contact with Africa by Portuguese sailors. 1442, contact with West Africa by Portuguese sailors. 1482, establishment of first trading port in present-day Ghana by Portuguese sailors. 1488, contact with South Africa and opening of sea route to Asia by Portuguese sailors. 1652, establishment of Cape Town by Dutch East India Company. 1884 to 1885, Berlin Conference and the subsequent scramble for Africa. This list of events are not the only events to happen, but they set a timeline of event, from contact with each region to first trade base and even settlements. From this timeline, we can see it takes about 400 plus years from initial contact to the eventual colonization of sub-Saharan Africa. Before I go any further, you might notice I use contact with sub-Saharan Africa and not African. For those not knowledgeable with history, sub-Saharan Africa is after North Africa. Most of North Africa was already known by Europeans. Egypt and Carthage, current-day Libya, and Ethiopia Abyssinia Empire were major players on the international stage in history. So mostly countries or land after the Sahara Desert were unknown by Europeans. Back to the topic at hand. So from the timeline, we can see where the 400 years came from, but why the lost? For that, I'm going to show another set of quotes. Regarding the Songhai Empire, Leo Africanus, a traveler whose writings were influential in the early 16th century, described the intellectual life of Timbuktu, noting, "Here are great store of doctors, judges, priests, and other learned men that have good pensions and salaries from the king." He also noted that in the market so great a plenty of gold existed that it outpaced the supply of goods. Regarding the kingdom of Benin, 1500s, Portuguese traders described Benin City as a massive, organized, and well-governed urban center. Accounts describe the city as a long wall with many gates featuring fine buildings and a very large and very beautiful King's Palace, Oba's Palace, adorned with intricate bronze work and ivory. Duarte Barbosa, Portuguese officer, early 1500s. Traveling along the East African coast, Barbosa noted the brisk trade and riches of Swahili city-states, observing great plenty of gold in settlements like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Malindi. Vasco da Gama, 1498. Upon arriving in East Africa, Portuguese explorers were surprised to find prosperous, sophisticated trading ports that were heavily integrated into international trade networks, contrary to assumptions of a dark continent. I have made no edits to any of these quotes, simply presented them as I was shown, after fact-checking their level of historical truth. This raises the question, how did Africa go from a sophisticated system and economy to a bunch of savages in just 400 years? Was Thomas F. Dixon just racist and sought to pollute the truth of Africa, or were the European traders in the 1500s simply hyping African empires and kingdoms? The truth is both are true for their time. When Europeans came into contact with Africans, they were ahead, but an invasion into Africa in the 1400s and 1500s would most likely have resulted in an African kingdom ending up victorious. Not due to pure military might, but a combination of home advantage and gruesome terrain that was Africa in the 1400s to 1600s. While ahead, the Europeans and Africans were still technically at the same civilization stage. But 400 years later, to the Europeans what they saw was nothing but savages, simply because both parties were not on the same scale again. The gap that existed between both civilizations was what warranted the word savages. A brutal adjective, but one that is understandable. This brings us to the title, The Lost 400 Years. Africa didn't lose 400 years to colonization, not to war but to stagnancy, and I highlight a part of Thomas F. Dixon, quote, "With league on league of ocean strand and miles of inland seas, for 4,000 years he watched their surface ripple under the wind, heard the thunder of the surf on his beach, the howl of the storm over his head, gazed on the dim blue horizon calling him to worlds that lie beyond, and yet he never dreamed to sail." For while you may hate him, this part of his statement was, without doubt, true, as Dee thought to forge a path out of his home never materialized, contented to what he had. He stagnated till what the civilization he was proud of was nothing but a speck, not capable of withstanding a breeze, and his future in history was left to be written and rewritten by those who saw and proved themselves his betters. This stagnancy is clearly seen and understood from a look at the Congo Empire relationship with Portugal. As Europeans evolved, African empires and kingdoms remained the same, not knowing the world had left them behind. And so mighty empires fell not to anything but stagnancy as the world they knew changed, and they refused to ask why or try to follow accordingly. I have always been a big fan of history because they give conclusive views on socio-political issues and insights into the minds of those whose stories are told when you put their lives under the spotlight. When African history from 1400s to 1900s is put under the spotlight, the shortcomings are quite clear. While African countries got the short end of the stick in terms of geography, the fact over 300 years of trade occurred without acquisition of knowledge is quite remarkable. The fact that the driving force of change where from outside is also disappointing. If not for Fulani warriors expanding down West Africa and European forces expanding. This leads to a situation where I could easily raise the argument that most of West Africa and South Africa remain the same because the disposition for change and new things doesn't seem to be there at all. This means without external influence, Africa of the 1500s is Africa of the 20th century. And I can make this argument because if you can see progress and not pursue it, why would I believe you can grow when you're not even aware of what the road looks like?